The movie opens with a violent thunderstorm raging through a small town in Maine. David, a local artist, is seen working on a painting in his home. The storm causes significant damage, uprooting trees and destroying parts of his house, including his boathouse. The next morning, David surveys the damage with his wife and young son, Billy. As they assess the damage, they notice that the tree responsible for the destruction actually came from their neighbor Brent's yard. David walks over to Brent's property to discuss the situation. He approaches Brent with a calm demeanor, hoping to resolve the matter amicably. David mentions that the tree from Brent's yard has destroyed their boathouse and asks if Brent has insurance that might cover the damage. Brent, already on edge due to the destruction of his car, reacts with hostility. He snaps at David, accusing him of being inconsiderate and failing to recognize the extent of his own losses. But after a while, Brent eventually calms down and agrees to look into his insurance information, promising to provide it to David later. He then asks David for a ride into town, as his car is unusable. David agrees, and the two men, along with Billy, set off for the local supermarket. As they drive into town, they notice an unusual sight: military vehicles speeding past them in the opposite direction. The presence of the military strikes them as odd, but they dismiss it as part of the storm cleanup efforts. When they arrive at the supermarket, they find it bustling with activity. People are panic buying supplies, filling their carts with food, water, and other essentials. The atmosphere is tense, with an undercurrent of unease that suggests something is amiss. David, Brent, and Billy grab what they need and head to the checkout, where they encounter their neighbor, Ms. Repeler. She greets them briefly, but the conversation is cut short by the sound of sirens and the sight of police cars rushing past the store. The sudden urgency of the police presence adds to the growing sense of dread, leaving everyone in the store on edge. Moments later, a man named Dan Miller bursts into the supermarket, his face bloodied and his eyes wide with terror. He warns everyone that something is in the mist and that it took his neighbor. His frantic plea to lock the doors immediately sends a wave of panic through the store. Before anyone can fully process his words, a man who had been shopping with his family decides to leave, insisting that he needs to check on his loved ones at home. Despite the warnings, he runs out into the mist, only to be swallowed by the thick, unnatural fog. His screams echo back to the store, confirming the horrifying reality of Dan's claims. The mist, which has now completely enveloped the supermarket, becomes a symbol of the unknown and the terrifying forces lurking within it. Inside the store, the situation grows increasingly chaotic. An earthquake shakes the building, causing everyone to fall to the ground. When they get back up, Mrs. Carmody, a religious fanatic who had been quietly muttering about the end of days, seizes the opportunity to preach to the group. She declares that the events outside are a sign of God's wrath and that the end of the world is near. Her fiery sermon divides the group, with some people clinging to her words for comfort and others dismissing her as a fearmonger. Brent, ever the skeptic, tries to calm everyone down, urging them to remain rational. However, his efforts are undermined when a woman who had been shopping with her children insists on leaving to check on them. Despite the warnings, she steps out into the mist and is never seen again. David, concerned for Billy's well-being, takes him to the back of the store to comfort him. Billy is visibly shaken, worried about his mother, who is at home alone. David reassures him, but his own fear is evident as he struggles to make sense of the situation. Determined to restore some semblance of order, David volunteers to check the store's generator, which has failed. He makes his way to the storage room, where he finds the generator malfunctioning and something burning. As he works to fix it, he hears a strange noise coming from the garage door. The sound grows louder, and David realizes that something is pushing against the door from the outside. Panicked, he rushes back to the main area of the store and warns the others. However, his claims are met with skepticism, and a group of men, including Jim and John, decide to investigate for themselves. In the storage room, the men open the garage door slightly, only to be met with the thick, impenetrable mist. One of the men, a young employee, leans out to get a better look, but before he can react, a massive tentacle emerges from the mist and drags him outside. His screams are cut short as the creature devours him, leaving the remaining men in a state of shock and terror. Jim, who had been the most vocal skeptic, apologizes to David for not believing him earlier. The group agrees to keep the incident quiet for now, fearing that the truth will cause widespread panic. However, the discovery of blood and a severed tentacle in the storage room forces them to confront the reality of the situation. Back in the main area of the store, the group begins to fortify the windows and doors, using whatever materials they can find to create a barrier against the creatures in the mist. Mrs. Carmody continues to preach about the end of days, her rhetoric growing increasingly extreme. She calls for a human sacrifice, citing the story of Abraham and Isaac as justification. Her words sow discord among the group, with some people beginning to believe her and others rejecting her outright. Jim, one of the store employees, confronts her, urging her to stop spreading fear. However, Mrs. Carmody remains steadfast in her beliefs, warning that the creatures will come for them one by one if they do not heed her warnings. Brent, still unconvinced of the danger, decides to leave the store with a small group of like-minded individuals. He believes that they can find help and insists that the mist is nothing more than a natural phenomenon. David tries to reason with him, urging him to stay, but Brent refuses to listen. As a compromise, David suggests that Brent tie a rope around his waist to measure the safe distance. Ambrose, another customer, volunteers to tie himself to the rope, as he wants to retrieve a shotgun from his car. The group watches anxiously as Brent and Ambrose step out into the mist, the rope trailing behind them. Moments later, the rope is violently pulled upward, and Ambrose's screams echo through the mist. The rope is cut, and when David and the others pull it back, they find it covered in blood. The severed remains of Ambrose's body are dragged into the store, confirming the horrifying truth: there is something in the mist, and it is deadly. As night falls, the survivors in the supermarket grow increasingly anxious. The mist outside is impenetrable, and the creatures within it have already claimed several lives. To maintain some sense of security, a few volunteers take turns keeping watch for any suspicious movements. One of the men, tasked with guarding the store, prepares to eat a piece of chicken while keeping an eye on the windows. Suddenly, a bug-like creature leaps onto the glass, startling him. He screams in terror, drawing the attention of everyone in the store. David rushes over to see what's happening and is horrified to find the creature clinging to the window. Before he can react, more of these insectoid creatures appear, swarming the window and filling it with their writhing bodies. The sight is both mesmerizing and terrifying, as the survivors realize that these creatures are unlike anything they've ever seen. Soon enough, an even larger creature, a flying, predatory insect, swoops down and begins devouring the smaller bugs. The survivors watch in stunned silence as the larger creature demonstrates the brutal hierarchy of the mist's ecosystem. The tension escalates as the larger bugs begin attacking the glass windows, their massive bodies slamming against the fragile barrier. The windows shatter, and the bugs swarm into the store, sending the survivors into a panic. Amanda, one of the more resourceful members of the group, manages to kill one of the bugs with a makeshift weapon. David, thinking on his feet, grabs a mob and asks Amanda to set it alight for him, using it to set one of the larger bugs ablaze. The creature writhes in agony before collapsing, but the victory is short-lived. Elsewhere in the store, a bug attacks Sally. The creature stings her, injecting her with a potent venom. She collapses, convulsing in pain as the poison takes hold. Despite the group's efforts to save her, Sally succumbs to the venom, her death a grim reminder of the mist's lethality. Mrs. Carmody is also attacked by one of the bugs. However, in a bizarre twist, the creature does not sting her. Instead, it seems to recoil and fly away, leaving her unharmed. This inexplicable event reinforces her status as a prophet in the eyes of her followers, who interpret it as a sign of divine favor. Meanwhile, Mrs. Carmody's influence continues to grow. Her group of followers has expanded overnight, and even Jim, who had been a skeptic, has joined her ranks after witnessing the horrors in the pharmacy. She preaches with renewed fervor, her voice echoing through the store as she declares that the end is near and that only through sacrifice can they hope to survive. In the evening, Amanda quietly wakes David, who has been keeping watch over Billy. The group gathers their supplies and prepares to make their move. They move cautiously, aware that any noise could alert Mrs. Carmody and her followers. However, just as they are about to leave, they're caught by Mrs. Carmody, blocking their path. Her presence is commanding, and her eyes burn with fanatical conviction. She accuses David and his group of being the source of the evil that has descended upon the earth, claiming that their defiance of her teachings has brought the wrath of God upon them. Her followers, emboldened by her words, surround David and his group, trapping them. Mrs. Carmody's rhetoric takes a darker turn as she declares that the only way to survive is through the blood of an innocent, specifically, Billy. She points to David's son, claiming that his sacrifice will appease the creatures and save them all. Her followers, now fully under her spell, move forward to seize Billy. Just as it seems that all hope is lost, Ollie pulls out a gun and shoots Mrs. Carmody. The shot rings out, and she collapses to the ground, dead. Her followers, now leaderless and confused, scatter in fear, allowing David and his group to make their escape. The group rushes out of the store, their hearts pounding as they step into the mist. The world outside is eerily silent, the thick fog obscuring their vision and amplifying their fear. Despite the losses, they manage to get into the car. David takes the wheel, his hands trembling as he starts the engine. They drive away from the supermarket, the mist swirling around them as they navigate the desolate streets. As they pass the store, they catch a glimpse of the survivors left behind. The faces of those who chose to stay are filled with despair and betrayal, their eyes pleading for help. As they continue down the road, the full extent of the devastation becomes apparent. The mist has consumed everything, and the world they once knew is gone. The creatures roam freely, their monstrous forms a constant reminder of the new reality they must face. The group is silent, each member grappling with the enormity of what has happened. The weight of their losses and the hopelessness of their situation begin to take their toll. Eventually, the group comes to a grim realization: they cannot survive in this new world. The thought of living in constant fear, surrounded by unimaginable horrors, is too much to bear. They decide that the only way to escape the nightmare is to end their own lives. David, his voice trembling, agrees to carry out the act. One by one, he shoots the group, including Billy. The sound of each gunshot is deafening, a heartbreaking echo of the love and hope that once bound them together. When it comes time for David to take his own life, he pulls the trigger, only to find that the gun is out of bullets. Devastated and broken, David steps out of the car, screaming in anguish. He looks around, hoping that the creatures will come for him and put an end to his suffering. But as he stands there, the mist begins to clear. In the distance, he sees the military advancing, their tanks and flamethrowers cutting through the mist and driving the creatures back. Behind them are other survivors, people who have managed to endure the horrors of the mist. The realization hits David like a sledgehammer: if he had only waited a few more minutes, they all could have been saved. The weight of his decision crushes him, and he falls to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably.